So when I mention the Mycenaens, who are we talking about? Peter. What do we think about Mycenaens? Who are we?
I think Greece.
Lovely.
Top of my head.
The thing is, what I'm seeing with people's lectures, the topics that they're choosing are not exactly what I would have imagined people would be choosing. I would have thought people would be choosing local stuff, and sort of most of it's further away from our wonderful land of ours, which isn't unusual at all. But I thought people would be sort of wanting me to do Britain all the time. And I'm really upset that I haven't actually done any Roman stuff for ages, or any prehistoric stuff in Britain for ages, or any medieval stuff in Britain for ages. So that's a clue for a Lynn's topic.
I got one for you.
Go for it.
Landmace.
The Roman Landmace.
Well, I want to know, they did the dig, but I don't know anything that came out of it.
Landmace generally.
And then they changed their minds anyway, and then they did another dig, and
Okay, so what I'm going to do, because it has to be more than just local, so we'll do the Landmace Roman Villa. Hang on, we'll do the Landmace Roman Villa and compare it with the Roman Villa at Badderden that I did as my thesis for UHI. So we've got a comparison, and that will be a good comparison. So it'll keep everybody happy. So well done, that's fine. So we'll do that. Seeing as it's you, Lynn, we'll do that. So, yeah. So I think gently and subtly, the Mycenaean civilization doesn't really appeal to everybody, but those that do see the appeal of the Mycenaean civilization, they will see it's a great discovery of an archaeologist who has been, for the better part, derided in archaeology, i.e. Dr. Heinrich Schliemann. And he's been derided because he made big mistakes with Troy, but then again, lots of archaeologists have made mistakes with archaeology when they're in their early stages. So these are the two wonderful figures that you would see associated with Mycenae. The site itself, the heart of the Mycenaean civilization. These are not the Minoans. These come into play roughly 3,200 years ago. Bit beyond that. The Mycenaeans, like the Minoans, seem to come and they seem to go. It's one of those typical areas of Greek history that we don't really understand what's going on. One thing about Greece is that before Heinrich Schliemann, it was believed that there was nothing before classical Greece. It was believed that you had stones and then you had classical history. So nobody really believed that there was a leap between burial chambers, which are as crude as ours, and the Parthenon. They just thought it was like there to there. Nobody really believed there was anything in the middle. But we do see high culture with the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, where we actually get language 1,000 years before the great temples are being constructed in Greece. And I think this discovery was made by Heinrich Schliemann, backed up by the work of an archaeologist known as Flinders Petrie. Naturally, last night at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was shouting and screaming at the computer screen, hoping that I had enough information, and I realised I did. And one of the people I was shouting and screaming at was Flinders Petrie, because Flinders Petrie and Heinrich Schliemann seem to identify this civilization, but Heinrich Schliemann is the one that gets the credit for it. And it's actually named after the place where the Mycenaean civilization was really first discovered. And then you look at the subtleties of history, where you get Homer's Iliad, and you get Troy, and you get all that stuff coming in. But again, Heinrich Schliemann did make mistakes with when he identified the site of Mycenae and Mycenaean civilization. He found some wonderful treasures at the hub of the civilization, which are actually much easier and he thought he was looking into the mask of the great Agamemnon himself, and all these other little subtle things about his discoveries. But he did discover something really important, and if he had survived, he would have also identified the Minoan civilization as well, if he hadn't died in 1892. Now, just a couple of things about Mycenae. The site itself was a site of great treasure, a site that you had skeletal remains covered in gold with golden masks. Schliemann announced in the discovery of these wonderful graves, shaft graves, the skeletal remains with covered in gold masks and all sorts of things. He declared that these should be attributed to Agamemnon, and in his own words, I do not for a moment hesitate to proclaim that I have found here the sepulchres, the burials, the locations which tradition attributes to the king of men, Agamemnon. He got it wrong, but then again, these were much earlier. And I always feel if you get something wrong in archaeology, if you identify something from the 1000s and it turns out to be from the 500s, that's a bit of a bonus. Bodies belonging to a much earlier period in Greece. So not only is he working at Mycenae, he's finding a civilization, he's also finding out the civilization goes back a long way beyond what he could ever believe. And this is before radiocarbon dating. And it's been said of my lecture about Alexander the Great yesterday and Tuesday that it seemed that I was giving a lecture about somebody who I had a feeling of hero worship for. But in fact, lots of figures in history are very important, and their influence, whether you see it in the history or the archaeology or together, has different degrees of importance. And I saw the lecture of Alexander the Great being very important, and the Mycenaean civilization today similar. So what are we talking about? The land, where are we? And actually, in typical what I should be doing, giving you up-to-date information, we know more. We know some really recent stuff about the Mycenaean civilization, i.e. in the last few days, with declared discoveries and a reinterpretation of the Mycenaean civilization at Pylos. So whatever I do say today might change with what I've got with this new information, which I haven't really put into my mind yet. The Mycenaean civilization is stretched over this area here. It may not seem big, it may not seem great, but when we look at Macedon from last week, and we look at Philip II, it was said that Philip II's empire was great, and it wasn't much bigger than this, really. Okay, so it's a nice little great world, civilizer. It's taken over lands that had been previously civilized, i.e. with the Minoan civilization, which we see being lost 300 years earlier, and the Mycenaeans are seemingly occupying this basin of Greekness. And it's got different things of how, what's really happening, and invasions into the Mycenaean world. But to be honest with you, I'm not really interested in that today. I just want to get to the grip of who these people are. And that's what I was being asked to do in the first place. And when we look at places like Langford and things like that, you should try and get a grip with what's actually there, rather than coming up with too many theories.
I noticed there was a city of Thebes there.
Oh yeah, we've got it again, so don't worry.
I was just thinking there's a city of Thebes in ancient Egypt, wasn't there?
Yes.
So, is there any correlation between the names, or it was just...
That's a question that I'm not going to answer, because I don't know the answer to that question, because that's two levels. That's looking at ancient Greek text and Egyptian and working that one out. Again, I've done it 2 weeks in a row. A question that I can't answer. I'm slipping. So we look at that site today, Mycenae. Not really a mention of Alkamenos, which is a very famous site. Not much of a mention about Athens. I just want to look at these two sites. But when you look at this, what you can see is quite simple. You can see a large amount of archaeological sites spread all over the place. And if I'd have known in 1985 when I went to Zakynthos, and I knew that there was Mycenaean sites there, I would have visited them, but that was many years ago. So what we've got a culture itself that was probably breathing and in itself important. Forget about those dates, for say about 200 years from about 1400 years BC. This is replacing the skeletal remains of the Minoan world, which had been lost due to the eruption of Thera, and then in its stead, gradually but surely, the Mycenaean take over. But we've got lots of these different sites all over the place. And where do we see the influence with us? Not at this minute. So, but yes, we've got lots of interesting archaeology there. Now, this itself is, we saw the original, we saw that image earlier on, and we saw those, I was a bit vague, there was a slab and you saw two sort of carved lions, the lion gate. I didn't want to mention too much about that. But what we've got here, we've got a very interesting populated site, buildings that are not just on 1 story, 2 story, 3 stories, they're quite tall buildings, which we probably knew existed in a Minoan civilization 300 years previous. And for some strange reason, my lead, there you go, pull it, that's not good. Gillian, if you just keep pulling the lead for the next whole hour, it should work. Right, faulty lead. Stretch it. Good. Sorry. So what we've got a wonderful map of how they believe that this wonderful city looked. You know, with 2, 3, 4 story buildings, shops, palatial roads and walls and all the rest of it. So this is based on some of the work of Schliemann himself, but we do get representations of this great grave. We do get representations of the wall when we see it in the excavation work of Schliemann. The work of Schliemann at Troy, the work of Schliemann at Mycenae was a lot more advanced than his work at Troy. He had been booted off Troy and decided to excavate here, and his work was a hell of a lot better here. And do I tell you that nice little story of how we found the graves? Yeah, I'll tell you that. But we need the other plan in a minute. But lots of gateways and stuff going into it. Just trying to be vague at this minute. Different postern gates, different gateways going in, and so on, and a wall. Sometimes these plans are not really as good as they should be. The grave circle. The grave circle. I'll tell you Schliemann's story of the grave circle. Lots of information there on the grave circle. Well, he had apparently in 1876 he just finished the excavations at the grave circle. Hadn't really found what he wanted to find, and suddenly there was a thunderstorm. And the thunderstorm, the rain was just falling onto the ground and wasn't going anywhere, except here. It was just going into the ground in holes in the ground. Okay. Now this is very much linked to how Howard Carter is said to have discovered some of the tombs in Egypt, where he would go along and wait for it to rain, and suddenly the water would just go into holes in the ground. Right. That's where tombs were being found by the likes of Howard Carter in the 1920s in Egypt. Similar thing with Schliemann. This great thunderstorm, and the water was just disappearing. He thought, this is strange, because everywhere else the water's just staying on the surface. The ground is so baked, it's just not really going anywhere. It's just going whatever. So it's just going in the ground. He thinks this is wonderful. So when it stopped raining, the ground is all moist, and he's excavating away. As he's excavating away, he comes across these golden masks, the masks of Agamemnon, that I've said dated to an earlier period before the Mycenaean civilization. So he's excavating away. And this is really interesting. He looks at the mask and he's saying, I'm looking into the face of Agamemnon, I'm looking into real history here. It's a very, very historical moment. In history, we very rarely look into the faces of our heroes. Agamemnon, after all, had been somebody that had been reading about through Homer's Iliad and Troy and all the rest of it since he was a child. So he's now looking into the face of Agamemnon. And there were a number of bodies there, and he took the more ornate one, and he wanted to look into the eyes of Agamemnon himself. And we don't know if this is true or not, but there's a witness saying it was. The camera's somewhere else. They do have photography in 1876. Apparently, as he took away the mask, the flesh was actually still on the bones, and apparently he was actually looking into the face of Agamemnon, and it was so poetic. But as he's looking into the face of Agamemnon, the face is fading away. And he sends somebody off to get a camera, and as soon as he had lifted the golden mask, the face was so fading away, it was almost as if history was fading away, and it went down to bone. Don't know how much of that is true, but there might be some truth in that, because when Andronicus is working on the tombs at the Gigina in Macedonia, it's said that as he enters the tomb of Philip II, this is in the 1960s, he sees a vase, and there's some flowers upright in the vase, and he's queuing the vase, and he's looking away, and no sooner as he looked away, the flowers had just gone to dust. And I can believe Andronicus with his work at Vigina that he actually saw that. So there's no reason to say that didn't happen to Schliemann at Mycenae. It's quite possible. Again, moving on, and this is sort of a gentler image. We don't really know how the city looked. It's basically up on a big rock. You've got the grave area of the great kings and the other buildings, and again we look back onto the plan and just some nice subtle information. It's a fortified palace complex. I'm saying it was excavated in 1876 because that's when he had to leave Troy. The term Mycenaean, more properly late Bronze Age, applies to an entire culture. It's said it's over a longer period of time there, but this site looks like it's flowing by about 1200 years BC. By about 1100 years BC, the site is abandoned completely, and therefore we get the perfect level of archaeology still surviving for us to see today. And obviously, when a site's just abandoned, people are able to go in there and they're able to excavate and actually get down to the layer, rather than being mucking around with the stuff above. And this is probably why he was able to get straight to what he needed to do. Lots of other information there, but we've got lots to get through today, and I just didn't want to just do this one site. So I think one thing that needs to be said straight away is what we're looking at. The Empire of Alexander the Great was an empire that had a Greek unity. It was all sort of together for 12 years, with all these cities named after Alexander the Great, and so on and so on. It could be said to be a Greek empire from India all the way through to Egypt and to Macedon. Okay, that's fine. A unity of purpose. Empires back at the time of the Mycenaeans was slightly different. What it was were basically groups of states that would basically have the same representation. Okay, we're all allies. Okay, we're all sort of saying the same thing. and we're all sort of working together, and we all call ourselves the Mycenaens. And when you looked at that other map, it sort of shows that as all green. But these are sort of working alongside the Mycenaens, and that's what gives it a sense of empire. It's a very different empire that we would see today. For example, we're all British, aren't we? You know, there's no such thing as Welsh or Scottish, right? But I'm being cynical there. But what we're saying, we're all British, right? This is our country. That's fine. Yeah. But Mycenaean civilization was slightly different. You would have Welsh people, you would have Scots people, and then they might come together to fight under one banner, but the rest of the time they're sort of alone. Okay, that's what empires were like back then. Nothing like Rome. If you're Roman, you're Roman, and that's it. Very important that. And the other thing that gives them a sense of being Mycenaean is not just that we're sort of Mycenaeans next week and then we'll do this and whatever. It's the sense of culture as well. It's about what they're bringing to it, and you've got this sense of trade and pottery. So they've all got similar types of pottery being traded, and that's what gives them their identity. Okay. Moving on. I've got your kerfuffles, haven't I? This is nice, and it puts it into more of an understandable context rather than the archaeology and the history. It says here, let's put this into our mindsets. The Trojans assault the Mycenaean encampment at Besika Bay. Don't really need to know. Having beached their ships at Besika Bay, the Mycenaean war party hastens to construct a rampart around their encampment. This reconstruction depicts a determined Trojan assault upon the Mycenaean defences prior to their completion, with the Trojan warriors intent on firing the Mycenaean ships. The Mycenaeans are obviously caught off guard, so we witness a chaotic scene with some warriors dropping their work tools and rushing for their arms and armour as others emerge from their shelters with bleary eyes. Now, that's really nice, isn't it? But that takes us into the language of what Schliemann was used to. Schliemann was wanting to find a culture like this to link in with Troy and all the rest of it, and he found it in the eyes of the Mycenaeans. And obviously that sense of the Mycenaeans being against the Trojans being against the Mycenaeans, Homer's Iliad, we got it. Right? So that's what we're talking about. Whether you want me to turn around and say that Homer's Iliad is completely archaeological fact, you're not going to have that. But what we've got a story that's actually got a little bit of meat on the bones, and that's exactly what Schliemann was looking for. So when you see an image like this, you're sort of getting into the scene of this epic. There's actually walked out on the ground within the archaeology itself. X marked sort of the spot. You're not going to get it perfectly word for word. The siege of Troy wasn't the siege of Troy that Homer's writing about, but there was something going on, and that's what's important. And there you go, looking down on it, and when you get the mindset away from all these words and buildings and walls and stuff, you look at the site itself. That is 3,000 years old, 3,100 years old when it's abandoned. It's up in the middle of nowhere. Well, to us it is. It's up in the middle of nowhere, and you've got the Lion Gate here, and you've got the graves, and you've got the buildings and all the rest of it. But this is a flowing, civilized centre, and it was abandoned 3,000 years ago. And you put that in context with us, we can't say that we're anywhere like this for another 1,000 years. It's Rome that gives us a similar like to this. But we've got about 1,000 years, so there's sort of a bit of a link. We've got high culture, we've got walls, we've got trade, we've got unity, we've got sense of purpose, we've got the same pottery, we've got leadership, we've got that name badge, all over in Greece, but over here we don't. It's a very different. Two huge contrasts. They're 1,000 years ahead of us. And that's basically what we're talking about. Actually, a lot more ahead of us than that. So, this is interesting. Whilst I was doing the research for this, I actually, my computer was going haywire, right? But they found a new site like Mycenae, right? A Mycenean site that they didn't know really existed before. It's almost as if they didn't know that was a Mycenaean citadel. All the fields around it. We'll just leave that there. Let's just not really explore it. And this is really interesting to have these weird things that they're looking at it now and understanding it. Okay. A team of archaeologists survey and excavate the remains of a major ancient Mycenaean citadel. An archaeological site featuring ruins that are turning out to be much more extensive than what meets the naked eye. So, you've got something that's so blooming obvious, but it's not really, nobody's really taken any notice of it, And there's so much out there like this. It's saying that teams of specialists have been systematically surveying an imposing island-like flat-topped bedrock outcrop that rises up to 40 meters above a surrounding plain with a summit area stretching 50 acres. So this site is as big as Maiden Castle in Dorset. It's huge. And it said that the citadel known as glass and identified as consisting of ancient Mycenaean structures. The summit area featuring the ruins is estimated to measure 10 times the size of the ancient city of Mycenae Tyrannus and 7 times that of Mycenae, the famed city of Agamemnon and Homer's Iliad. So in other words, we're trying to, it would be like, right, it would be finding a Roman city north of Barry. There was a load of humps and bumps and nobody's investigated it. This is quite weird, this. Getting that sense that things are being discovered and they're so obvious. And they're huge. And thinking about these sites, you can sort of rewrite history on them. All these new investigations. So a little bit about Heinrich Schliemann. Heinrich Schliemann, born in 1822, died on the 26th of December 1890. It was quite tragic. He was in Naples. I think it was Naples. He was wandering through the streets of Naples, going to the hotel that he stayed at. And he just had some kind of heart attack in the street, and nobody knew who he was. They just left him there. And this was somebody that people would read about in Naples. This is somebody who made the headlines. They didn't know who he was. They just left him there, and then they realised, oh my God, it's Heinrich Schliemann. So they dragged him into the hotel, put him in a bed, and the next day he died. But that was life that was life back then. He was a businessman and a pioneer in the field of archaeology. His PhD was so interesting that and it's so unusual that the university just gave him a PhD just for the sake of it. Whether it was any good or not, I don't know. But anyway, he was an advocate of hystrosity. Is that right? Hystrosity on there? Hystrosity of places mentioned in the works of Homer and an archaeological excavator of Hyssala, which is presumed to be the site of Troy, along with Mycenaean sites and Tyrannus. His work lent weight to the idea that Homer's Iliad and Virgil's Aeneid reflect. It's not Aeneid, is it? Reflect historical events. Aeneid. Yeah. Schliemann's excavations of 9 levels of archaeological remains with dynamite has been criticised as destructive of significant historical artefacts, including a level that is believed to be the historical Troy. Basically, when he found Troy, he didn't know he'd actually found it. So he destroyed it, went down to the lowest layer, said that was Troy, went to Mycenae, learned how to become an archaeologist, and he went back to Troy then in the 1880s with a German archaeologist who said, do you know what, you've destroyed lots of Troy. So he worked somewhere else and actually found the real Troy, and that's basically what happened. So he's been vilified for the original work at Troy, but then again, the eventual work at Troy more or less proves that he's actually found it. So you can't get it all right. Along with Arthur Evans, Schliemann was a pioneer in the study of Aegean civilization in the Bronze Age. The two men knew of each other, Evans having visited Schliemann's sites. Schliemann had planned to excavate the Knossos, but died before fulfilling that dream. Evans bought the site and stepped in to take charge of the project, which was then still in its infancy. So, Schliemann was quite a discoverer of this wonderful set of archaeology. So here we go. I don't know if you can actually see that. I'll enlarge it a little bit. It's not going too badly, is it? Cool. Shut it. There was one interesting thing about how the Mycenaeans built. Obviously, by the time Schliemann got there, lots of the tombs in the Mycenaean landscape had collapsed and so on. But they built these nice dome-shaped tombs, and obviously a lintel with an apex like this. These wonderful tombs, probably slightly exaggerated. But this was drawn in 1834, and the treasury of Atreus. And it said the treasury of Atreus is one of the kings mentioned by Homer in the Iliad. This was drawn in 1834. But this was the typical types of tombs that they were building across the Mycenaean world. So their architecture was really highly advanced. So when I'm talking about comparing them with the wonderful land that we live in and what was going on in this landscape back then, nothing in comparison with this. Okay, Kathy could argue we've got wonderful monuments in Orkney and all the rest of it, but as high culture, the Mycenaeans were by far really advanced. The Mycenaeans began to they're known as Tolos tombs. Beehive tombs, and it's likely that these were being constructed after the collapse of the Minoan civilization. Looking at these tombs, the approach to the tombs was a long, unroofed passage cut into horizontally into the hillsides. There's lots of engineering going into them. The stones used to line the tomb were large limestones. The scale of these tombs are enormous. The lintel at the entrance of these tombs sometimes weigh up to 100 tons in weight. These huge lintels, massive. So not only were we able to see the greatness of these tombs, they're using extremely large sections of masonry to build them in the first place. So we got really good builders, and then their civilization ended. You've got the entrance to the tomb of Atreus there. You can clearly see it. Obviously, lots of this has changed within the past over 200 years. Some of the reconstructions inside, drawn by Dr. Heinrich Schliemann. He's called Henry Schliemann there, but then again, Heinrich Schliemann. So he's actually a good drawer as well, and that's what makes a good archaeologist. Somebody's able to draw what they see. Somebody's able to right, let's just draw this, whatever it looks like, and he was a good drawer. So when he actually went back to Troy after learning everything he'd learned from the Mycenaean civilization, he was able to get the subtleties out of Troy and actually to fit them into the story. So that's exactly what's going on. So this would be contemporary with the Trojan story. So I think what I'm going to do there, I'm going to take a tiny little bit of a break because I need one, and we'll do this article of the week, and then we'll come back. So there you go. So party like it's 2,500 years BC. Festive motive behind Stonehenge. Oh, do I read all this out? Oh, okay. Here we go. Gillian, make sure you buy newspapers next week.
Well, it was on the news, and they showed people dancing as they moved the stones along in somewhere in New Guinea or somewhere.
Yes, that links back to my lecture at Highlands and Islands, Professor Colin Richards. That's the type of thing he does. Well, you know, that's the type of thing he records. Choosing and moving giant stones may have been a way to celebrate. Do you remember that story I told you all about? My lecturer, he went to the Pacific Islands, and he went to this village. And they said, "Oh, next day we're gonna move a stone." Remember that story?
Seaweed, was that?
Oh no, that wasn't the seaweed one. No, I'll tell you quickly. The next day he woke up and these two lads were moving this huge stone, right, with no help from anyone else. Anyway, they moved it this long distance, and the next thing, one of the two lads' arm got trapped under the stone, and he had to be taken to hospital. So he left the one to push it. Anyway, so by the time they got to the location where the stone went, he was thinking, wow, we can actually see when these stones are erected now. It's going to happen, you know. So he's looking around and thinking, wow, this is going to happen. So he turned his back to the stone, and the next thing, everyone had disappeared. And he just thought, well, they've moved this stone. What an amazing feat. We're going to see how it's erected now. And anyway, the next day, that evening, he goes to ask the villagers. He said, well, you can't just leave the stone there. And he said, of course we can leave the stone there. That's the whole point. The whole thing is to move the stone. We don't want to do anything with it. And Colin was absolutely mortified. But then he actually realised that the process of moving the stone is as important as putting these things upright in the first place. And isn't that what this article is about? Bingo. The process of building Stonehenge and having a party at the same time may have been more important than the finished monument, says English Heritage. Experts believe that choosing the stones, moving them and setting them up on Salisbury Plain may have been a way of bringing people together to socialise and to celebrate. The idea is not to puzzle out in a scientific way engineering aspects of moving and setting up the stones, but to bring people together to enjoy a communal experience. In contemporary Western culture, we are always striving to make things as easy and quick as possible. But we believe that for the builders of Stonehenge, this may not have been the case. Drawing a large number of people from far and wide to take part in a process of building was potentially a powerful tool in demonstrating the strength of the community to outsiders. I'm not believing most of this, but I'm reading it out. Being able to welcome and reward these people who have travelled far, perhaps as a kind of pilgrimage with ceremonial feasts, could be a further expression of the power and position of the community. Whilst at home, all their animals were taken by somebody else, and they went back and they starved. Research at Stonehenge reveals that prehistoric people brought animals to the site from as far afield as northeast Scotland, more than 500 miles away, to take part in lavish midwinter feasts. Scientists examined some of the 38,001.5 bones and teeth. 90% of them pig, 10% cattle. Smack on that. No over that. Discovered at the site of a Neolithic village at Durrington. Durrington Walls was only settled for between 49.5 and 101 years, but is believed to have housed the circle's builders. Experts examined elements including strontium, which is found in teeth enamel. For the first 12 years of your life, you build up strontium, which comes from water, and your teeth tell you where you came from. Because isotopes, it's got it there. Because isotopes of strontium differ chemically according to the geology of the place where the young animals feed. It is possible to discover where creatures came from. They conclude that cows and pigs were herded hundreds of miles along ancient byways and highways, and may even have been brought by boat to southern England, which suggests that in 2,500 years BC, the Beaker period, was known across Britain as a place of pilgrimage and celebration. Sorry. There are amazing photos from societies in Indonesia and parts of India within the last 100 years or so of people practicing stone moving and rising. Well, I just said that. Now. They show people in ceremonial dress, amazing feasts happening, hundreds of people coming together and having a good time. As soon as you abandon modern preconceptions that assume Neolithic people would have sought the most efficient way of building Stonehenge, questions like why the blue stones were brought from so far away, the Preseli Hills of South Wales, don't seem quite so perplexing. You really wanted to make me to read this out, didn't you, Kathy? Over the weekend, groups of about 40 people will use rollers and ropes to move a hulk of limestone from a local quarry to show how it's done. Fair enough.
So does that mean people have always got stoned at parties then?
Yeah. I don't like that. I don't like that article for loads of things. It's presuming a lot, yeah. Do you know what, right? I did say I was going to stop there, but I'll just chuck an overview of what the Mycenaean civilization is about. I know, Lynn, you wanted to go out the room and scream, but you can't do it yet. Mycenaean civilization, obviously we feel it's a Bronze Age culture within within the Greek world. But there's one problem calling it a Bronze Age culture. They also had writing. You can't call it a prehistoric civilization because it had history. But they do call it prehistoric civilization. Don't worry. It represents an advanced civilization in mainland Greece that not only had its form of writing, it had art, organization, palaces, and so on and so on. Buildings that were 2-3 stories high. And it was spread over large areas we've already mentioned. The Mycenaean Greeks introduced several innovations in the fields of engineering, architecture, and military infrastructure, while trade and over vast areas of Mediterranean, the Mycenaean culture went. And one interesting thing with that is that the Mycenaean culture was aspired to in a way by the ancient Egyptian world, because at this stage you're talking about we're going about 1500 years BC, 1400 years BC. We're talking about the New Kingdom in Egypt, and we're talking about all those links of pottery. And actually, Flinders Petrie started to find Mycenaean pottery in his excavations in Egypt. Couldn't work out where they came from. So he sent a few etchings to Schliemann on his excavations. Schliemann said, "We found this pottery here." And Flinders Petrie knew exactly where it came from. Bingo. So that was great. So you've got a link there. So we've got Mycenaeans. We're looking at their script, known as Linear B, offers the first written records of the Greek language, and their region already included several deities that can be found. So they're writing about their gods as well. So got that information 3,500 years ago written down. But we know the Minoans before them are writing down things as well, so don't get too confused. The Mycenaean Greece was dominated by a warrior elite society and consisted of a network of palace states, as we've already mentioned. At the head of this society was the king, known as a Wanax. It's the first I've come across that, sorry. Mycenaean Greece perished with the collapse of Bronze Age culture. Some say due to a large number of invasions by sea people and sort of people across the land and so on. And it's probably because the civilization starts to collapse because there might be new introductions of new material like iron. A copper sword doesn't bear well against an iron sword, and it's said that there's all these amalgams. It's a Bronze Age culture because it's got bronze, not iron. There you go. Sorry to sound like that, but there's changes, and the Mycenaean civilization might be collapsing because there's this iron, and the Egyptians have come across iron as well, so they're struggling. Some say there might be other theories, similar theories that led to the loss of Minoan civilization. There may have been some kind of cataclysmic disaster that the Mycenaeans were affected by. It's in a volcanized zone after all the palaces collapsed one day and they couldn't get themselves together. But a bit of a fate that we don't really understand. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a break there. Are there any questions? My God. Either that was really interesting or it wasn't.
No,
right, go for it. Observation, yeah.
It's remarkable that it's not been built on and it's still there. It was there to be discovered. And
Yeah.
It looked actually, without the flat roofs, it could be medieval. The streets and stuff and the housing, couldn't it? Walls,
yeah.
you know, so
I think I think the earlier site that we mentioned, the new site that they're looking at, the one that's 7 times larger than Mycenae, that site itself is very much unaffected by modern development. And it seems in a way that lots of archaeology in Greece hasn't been built upon by later civilizations, which is really important. In parallel to that, in Britain, what we do see is Roman sites, and then we see Anglo-Saxon sites or early medieval sites. We've got medieval sites and Tudor sites, and all the Roman stuff has been inevitably conjuncted and destroyed. But this civilization has seemed to be preserved for archaeologists to actually find it, which I think is really, really important. If there's no more questions, everyone gets a raffle prize this week, even if they haven't won a raffle. You all get a little thank you gift this week. And we'll do eggs. And I would like to mention before we have the break, and I think this lecture I'll prepare for you, Lynn, will be very interesting, because it'll tie in a few things. And I would like to mention, anyone else interested in coming next Tuesday to the studio in Barry, 3 cups of tea and biscuits. Keith.
I'll see you on the train then.
I got my Barry making next week. Oh.
So anyway, next week there'll be Dennis. If you're going next Tuesday, you'll be joined by Kinky Claire.
okay.
So if anyone else wants to come along, then let me know. And then in Barry, between 11:30 and now 1, because me and Janine and Peter, we get so excited. We've got our sort of archaeology and history of the Vale, but we haven't actually moved out of one part of Barry yet because it's getting so excited. And I've got to mention something else. I mention my little group on a Wednesday, and it's usually, last week there was 5 of us, this week there was just me and Barbara, and next week there'll be like 6 or 7. On a Wednesday we meet at 2:15 at Surrey Church, and we go to different locations. So I said to Barbara, look, it's just me and you, we'll go to Merthyr Dovon Church in Barry. And I said, look, I've got this nice bit of medieval wall to show you that I was shown 4 years ago that wasn't recorded, and this is something that will a nice medieval wall of a building, completely ripped out, gone. And I just thought, I was saying to I had the opportunity. I actually had staff back then. I had the resources, and we didn't record it because I was waiting for a few years on. And I think the point is that things are moving so fast in archaeology now that if you see something, a photograph, something to record it, because these things are just going. So I was kicking myself. I was actually really bloody angry. I started to swear a lot, and then we went to the back of the church and we started looking in the river, where I nearly knocked myself out on a branch. I got a lump on my head. And we were looking in the river, and I said, "Oh wow, we've got a bit of human bone here." Yeah, because she's worked on, Barbara's worked on archaeological sites as well. And so, wow, look at this. We've got a humerus, and I'm thinking, right, okay, it's from the river. It belongs back in the river, so I put it back, and he said eroded from the churchyard, you see. And then we went at the back then, and a nice bit of medieval pottery. So I'll hand this around, and you can tell that it's been in a stream because there's like loads of lime on it. It hasn't been washed off yet. And then there's a bit of a got a bit of a knife there, fairly later, and obviously one of the roof tiles off the church, probably from about the 1600s. So hand that around. Nice bit of pottery. So we'll take a break. Sorted. It's all quiet. Fair enough. But God, I've been talking for an hour. Right. You don't have to all sit in the room. This is like ominous. This is like, look, I'm sorry. All right. I'll change the lecture. I'll do it on dromedaries. Can I just ask you all one thing before you go? Right. Why doesn't anyone choose the topic about animals? Like you know, the archaeology for dogs in the archaeology of dogs, or you know where we find them on archaeological sites or something. Can somebody just choose one on animals, please?
Well, I wanted to go about engineers, so I can do about why the animals they mummified and why.
You want to do the mummification? You do a mummification. You want me to do mummification?
I want to do about mummification. If you want to do animals, I'll go with that.
Right.
They did like mummifying bits of animals. No, they used to mummify.
What?
Well, they used to mummify about anything, didn't they?
Oh yeah, in about 1920, I think it was, the Cairo furnaces were running out of fuel, and they just made a discovery somewhere in Egypt of 1 million ibis. Is it ibis birds? Yeah, 1 million ibis birds. 1 million of them, all mummified, nicely mummified. So they said, "Oh, we're running out of fuel. We don't have enough coal," so they burnt them all.
Well, it's like they brought boatloads back to use as fertiliser.
Yeah.
Well, and obviously the Gualche mummies from the Canary Islands, when the Spanish got there, there was thousands of them, right? And then now there's about 5 left in the world. Are you alright?
Yeah, just have it
Oh, I'm not. She's upset me now. Right, okay, so so got the church. Well, I'll tell you. I'll mention a few things then. So, PhD, acid-free paper, Barron District, Claire, room, record, as HMS. But I think it's reasonable. I think it's reasonable. You know the US trip. If we say 20 quid, yeah. And whoever's doing the driving gets a fiver of the £20. Does that sound good? So I don't know how much we'll be charged for these events anymore, but and we'll all be going, and then we'll all be going to my son's house afterwards. If we make you cups of tea. What?
So what's he asking?
No charges for that as well, then?
No. Shut up. Don't undermine me. Us, we're doing with a castle.
Oh, that's alright.
We do the castle.
Castle, I like Castle.
There's the Battle of Usk as well, the other one. Not sure we'll do that. There's the bits of the rail line which I want to do.
Right.
And there's the museum and the wonderful church.
Oh, museum and castle. What's the status of the castle then?
You got to have an open mind.
Yeah, I know some castles are just like.
No, you got to have an open mind on it. I can't even describe it. There's loads of walls and it looks really weird if anyone's been to Usk Castle.
That's when is the trip?
It's the 12th. So what I'm going to do is if anyone wants to a deposit for it or whatever, a tenner, it's going to be 20 quid. So we need to sort out who's driving and the transport and stuff. So and it's been decided, right? It's been decided that nobody from Bridgend will be allowed to go on it. And the only people who will be allowed to go on it will be you guys, Roos, Ronver and Barry.
Not Cambridge. It isn't Cambridge.
No, Calvin's moved to Roos.
Are they?
Don't ask. The Cambridge class recomposition to Roos. and they are very different. They could have come here. No, they like you guys. They like people down here. So,
So is that 12th of April, is it?
yeah, it's got no 12th of May.
May?
May.
Oh, yeah. Put down for that then.
Okay.
That's plenty of time to get a cafe.
So the thing is, right? If it comes down to me needing to drive, then I expect you to get to Barry, okay? Because it's a bit too much for me to come down from the valleys for that day. Kathy's driving her car. Oh, bloody not, she's saying. What you can do, right? If we're nice to him, right? We'll bribe the bugger, right? We'll get it. You can all go in his Land Rover. We'll bribe him. So, okay.
Is that one? Yeah, I just put it back.
Yeah.
Can I have that back? Yep. Finish with that.
There's milk there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So how?
Don't tell Pete.
Just give me a slap on the nose.
Whatever you do, just don't tell Pete. Pete, don't tell Pete about the plan for the Land Rover, okay?
Thank you.
Oh, Pete, Keith has suggested, right, for this trip on the 12th of May, that some of them can go in your Land Rover. Well, Gillian got excited then. She's going.
Everyone done?
What? You know, can I just ask you something? It doesn't look sexy, you standing there with a tea bag on a spoon.
I've got to try and squeeze out.
Just give her here. I can't handle the heat.
Any more?
No.
Good.
Right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through everybody's names and tell them when their membership's due. What, you live in a van? What? Right, okay.
Hey, thank you.
There you go.
Last week they came on towards the end.
Right. This is a little token to say thank you for doing the raffle every week. That's for you.
Oh, thank you.
That's for you.
Oh.
Do you want to go?
Oh, is it?
There's a little barrage.
Yeah.
I haven't got many of these, so these are for the men.
Oh, well, actually, I've got a grandson who's doing history because of the
Right, I'll tell you what. Do you want that, Emily? Wait,
cans.
that's for you.
Sorry? 4 cans.
I've got. It's a shame I've given it. Because I've got some really weird ones, man.
Is it in June? Bang bang.
Why has it got movie bits on it?
It only moves to shoot into the ground. See?
The design fault there.
It must be a Corbin cannon. Doesn't fire.
Right, that's yours, lovely. Yours. I thought this would be appropriate for you. Go on, close. Am I going to give this? Right, that's appropriate for you. It's a Viking woman with big things.
Thank you.
And who hasn't had right?
She has got rather a big set of armour.
Fertility was it?
Yeah.
Do you need fertility check?
Gosh, no.
Is it an
Who else
earth
did
house?
Gosh, no, I can see it properly.
What, you don't get a black eye?
Interesting question about the Greek DNA, but it's really difficult to answer. Now, I threw this in the mix, right, and asked you what it all was. Just what does it look like?
Sandstone.
Yeah, but what? Any ideas what it might be used for?
Grinding.
Sharpening.
Well, if I'd have brought this in, a couple of weeks ago, and we were doing gaming pieces, you'd have thought it was a gaming piece, right? The point is that I didn't give you any context where this was found. Okay, so if I'd have said, oh, it may have been found on a Roman site alongside a Roman body, you would have thought, okay, some of you may have thought it was a gaming piece. So that's something out of context. But this was simply found on the front garden, right, where loads of stones on the front garden are like this. Lots of them are rounded like this, and they're certainly not gaming pieces. But taken out of context, in another layer, that could so easily become a gaming piece. So I think the point of showing you this and lots of other artifacts is when you find something, you've got to really write down where they come from. Because if you don't write down where they come from and the detail, they could literally be anything. Okay, I was delivering leaflets yesterday. That new sort of estate at the top there, where there's like 450 odd houses. You know, the one isolated. And I was delivering leaflets, and on somebody's front drive there was all these white pebbles all over the place, loads of them, right? And I'm thinking, oh, thank God my daughter's not here. She'd have chucked them all in a bag and took them home with her, right? Those stones have been brought there because there are beaches in this country that those white stones are everywhere, right? I know beaches in this country, the only stones you find on the beach are white stones, right? But you go to another part of the world and you don't find any white stones anywhere. And where you do find a white stone, that would be important. So it's all about context, if you're understanding where I'm going. So here we are again. We're back to where we are, Pylos, which will come into Mycenae. And, you know, this sort of understanding this landscape, this deep, rich landscape of ancient Greece. Now, here's a few interesting points about the Mycenae site. If I can get you to read that, maybe not. So I'll just read it from the text. You might be able to read some of that. Homer described the city as Mycenae rich in gold. Now, it was rich in gold, but not necessarily from the period that we're talking about. It was from the archaeology that he was finding, which had gold, you know, the gold mass and all the rest of it, weren't from the Mycenaean civilization. They were found at Mycenae, but they were from an earlier civilization. Okay? In the great epic poem, the Iliad, certainly the graves at Mycenae were rich in gold grave goods, such as this mask. The splendour of the graves at Mycenae demonstrate the power and grandeur of the Mycenaean kings of the time. Schliemann thought, but he was completely wrong because they were from an earlier time. Heinrich Schliemann went to Mycenae because it was the legendary home of King Agamemnon, leader of the Greeks, who went to Troy to fight the Trojan War. He used the text of Pausanias, a Roman traveller from around 100 years AD. The site was already well known, but he was the first to excavate systematically at the site, learning from all his mistakes at Troy. It's quite ironic, really, that he's excavating at Troy the landscape that wished to be conquered by the Mycenaean kings, which inadvertently destroys Troy. And then he excavates at Mycenae. It's quite ironic that. He discovered the deep shaft graves from an earlier period, which were cut into the rock of the Mycenaean Acropolis. Bodies dressed lavishly, decorated shrouds were adorned with gold items and crowns and necklaces, and their faces were covered by masks of gold. The bodies were lowered into the shafts and spectacular graves made of precious metals were placed inside. But again, it's still very important. It might be from an earlier period, but it sort of paints that the Mycenaeans, their ancestors, were rich enough to have buried their ancestors with gold anyway. So there's something of interest there. So the Mycenaeans flourished, as we know. The dates are slightly out here, from about 14,000 to about 12,000 years BC. Thanks for correcting me. 1400 and 1200 years BC. Thanks for the correction. There may have been a war between the Mycenaeans and the Trojans. The shaft graves are from an earlier period, but we can't really fix the date of the Trojan War into any specific moment. Whether Homer was writing about a number of wars, maybe he was putting it all together, we don't know. There was some kind of conflict. We've got the figures of history in the work of Schliemann with his excavations at Mycenae and the excavations at Troy and so on and so on. But as I said at the beginning, we can't be sure how much of the Iliad is fact or fiction. Anyway, move on a little bit further. This is that's Mycenae. It was one of several which marked the shaft graves. So that the circular structure that you saw on the site earlier on, the grave of the kings, the circular grave that you saw on the plan earlier on, he excavated, and it's a bit of a cross section as he's going down. So this is what we're describing. As he's excavating, he doesn't think there's anything there, and then suddenly the water just goes into holes into the ground, and he discovers these graves cut into the solid rock. And this is where the burials are actually coming from. And there's wonderful carvings coming from there as well. And all this work he's publishing not long after the discoveries. And there it is. There's this wonderful shaft grave. So he's finding all this on the top. And then suddenly he's excavating, he's going down and down and down. He thinks that's the end of the excavation, but he keeps going down and down and down. And I think you're right, really, what you said earlier on about this looking very similar to medieval architecture. It's very powerfully built. And it's actually, you're completely wrong, Peter. Medieval people wouldn't make walls as good as this.
Are those people in the middle there? There's two shadows.
Yeah, there's two people in the middle there.
Wow.
That gives you an idea of scale.
It is remarkable.
It is remarkable. And again, I didn't want to. If I was going to have a lecture, it would have said, look, let's look at Mycenae itself. That would have been great, but I just wanted to do the whole thing. But again, the immensity, the pure connectedness of these people. And I've been avoiding giving you this date, but I think it's come back to me. In the year 1528, that was the date of the eruption of Thera. I think that was the date. That ended the Minoan civilization about 100 years after we see the Mycenaeans. And the Minoans were really advanced, and in other words, the Mycenaeans had just taken it a little bit further. You know, they're taking those innovations a bit further. You know, the engineering innovations to have taller buildings. You've seen the Minoan palace at Knossos. We've done that, and all the labyrinthal rooms and stuff. It's a little bit before the Mycenaeans, but the Mycenaeans take it further. The buildings go upwards, and they're 3, 4, 5, 6 floors in height from evidence that we see in the collapsed archaeology. So just taking it further, and the language as well. So here we go, a nice sort of bit of an overview. Mycenae, Bronze Age city as we know, termed as an acropolis, and there are two sets of these carvings. There's another one there. Okay, there's two sets with these beautiful lions, all at Mycenae, and they're found elsewhere as well. They love their lions. In Greek mythology, the city was founded by Perseus, who gave the site its name either after his sword, fell to the ground and was regarded as a good omen, or as he found a water spring near a mushroom. Mykes, Mykes, which is mushroom in Greek. Place of the mushrooms, or the spring of the mushrooms. Oh no, don't laugh, this is perfectly feasible. Perseus was the first king of the Perseid dynasty, which ended the Eurethus dynasty. Obviously, this is all in their mythology. Succeeding reigns, and we're talking about whose first king, Atreus, is traditionally believed to have reigned around 1258 BC. Atreus, son of Agamemnon, is believed to have been not only king of Mycenae, but all of the Achaean Greeks, and leader of their expedition to Troy to recapture Helen. So how much of this is true, we don't know. In Homer's account of the Trojan War in the Iliad, Mycenae, the place of the mushrooms, is described as a well-founded citadel. So that's interesting. We've got a date there, 1250 years BC, which seems to be 50 years before the collapse of the Mycenaean world. Okay, there's a bit strange there. It's a well-founded city, golden Mycenae, and it's and obviously 15 kilograms of gold objects were recovered from the shaft grave, which is quite a lot actually. Situated on Rocky Hill, which is 50 meters high, surrounded by a plain. The site of Mycenae covered 30,000 square meters, and has always been known throughout history. So unlike the other one that we saw, they knew that this was Mycenae, but it wasn't touched. Interesting. They knew literally in literal circles it was there. We've got the first major systematic excavation there in 1876, but they were plodding around there a little bit before that. There were a few people digging there in 1841. But interesting to say that the systematic excavations, the proper archaeological excavations, were done by Schliemann. It's complete contrast to Troy, isn't it? There's this little thing flowing in this, and I think this is interesting. It's said that it may have been inhabited all the way back in Neolithic time, before the Minoan world and all the rest of it. And we've got early pottery and early flints and early finds. And we've got, even from as far back as the Minoan world, we've got painted walls, we've got high quality painted pottery. We've got high advanced pottery and all the rest of it. So this all flows back into the Mycenaean world, this gentle flow. It's saying that we've got the tombs there. Probably want to move on a little bit, but the Trolos tomb, the treasury of Atreus. So you imagine we've got the tomb of a king who's mentioned by a writer, which is really good. I like all these sort of things in Greek mythology and history that we can find histories in their mythology. We can find figures in their mythology associated with tombs and so on. It's a bit like the Alexander the Great thing last week. Anyways, talking about the treasure of Atreus there, and we've got another image there, the Lion's Gate there, as you lead through into the Lion's Gate into the main area. That's from outside leading in. On the right, you have the large circular grave area. Talking about the architecture, really important. Didn't talk about architecture last week with Alexander the Great, should have. The large palace structure built around a central hall, which is typical of Mycenaean palaces. Other features included a secondary hall, many private rooms, workshops, decorated stonework and frescoes, Lion's Gate, a 3x3 square doorway with an 18-ton lintel topped, heraldic lions. They led their lions, and it's quite likely that please correct me on this, but it's quite likely that there would have been lions which would have escaped wandering around Greece at this time as well. It's quite likely, because there were a lot more lions around Europe, mainland Europe, obviously, than there is today.
That is supposed to be a factor.
Yeah, we'll go with that. The mountain lions of Greece, for example, but I think these are more sort of strident type lions that we would find from Africa wandering around Greece
Well, there were
back in the
lions
day.
the Bible, so
Yeah.
that part of the world
Exactly.
had lions.
So why not? Why not?
Go around.
That's the fun.
So it wasn't something that they didn't know. It was something that they were connected with, the lion, strident lion. The relationship between the palace and the surrounding settlement and between Mycenae and other towns is much discussed by scholars, but we can work out it's like a loose confederation of people under one banner. Concrete archaeological evidence is lacking, but it seems like the palace was a centre of political, religious and commercial power. Certainly high value grave goods, administration, tablets, we got written work there. Pottery imports, their own pottery. Ivory has survived from their gold and bronze. It's a site that was thriving and suddenly it ended. And it's talking about all the other stages of the development of the site there, and it's talking about the wonderful staircase, a stone staircase, which is an earlier staircase which had 86 stone steps, and each of those steps would have been X amount of tons in weight, all that type of stuff, wonderful stuff. It's saying that some of the phases were destroyed by fire. Maybe the site was lost due to a natural event. We don't know, as I said earlier on. Artifacts found that the site we're talking about celebrated artifacts from Mycenae, obviously the pre-Mycenaean civilization, the golden mask, for example, golden cups, golden blades, ivory sculpture, and all the rest of it. It's testament to not what was there before the Mycenaean civilization, but what the Mycenaean civilization inherited, which is really important. We're talking about we're talking about advanced culture, and I'm so sorry to criticise our own culture at the time, but what I am really saying is that where these people are flying to the moon, we haven't entered into driving cars yet. They're well ahead. They're in the middle of great architecture, intercourse between all civilizations around, and we're talking about you're talking about how we see the Greeks. We're talking about them, that bread basket, not in the sense of wheat, but a bread basket of everything going into one basket, and that being a cradle. As we see cradles of civilization in the Indus Valley and the Mesopotamian valleys as well, with Babylon and all the rest of it, we see all these as being areas where civilizations are moulding themselves. And I think that's what we should look at, not really the DNA, but where we're being moulded. And I think I struggled. I thought, right, how do I put across the archaeology? Do I put it across looking at walls and buildings? And for some strange reason, I said no. The culture itself is not to be put across by walls and stuff. Let's just do pottery for once, okay? Mycenaean pottery and the development of Mycenaean pottery. That's Mycenaean pottery. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's the type of stuff you get.
Refined.
What, pardon?
Very refined.
Yes, it's the type of stuff that you might get from one of those shops in Greece as tokens that you want to take home with you. But this stuff is the original thing. That's the real thing. Very refined, handles, it's decorated, highly fired, all those things that you would look at and think as being precious, and intact examples. Intact examples only come from sites that haven't been screwed around with by later cultures. And that's important. The abandonment idea, whatever, okay? I think archaeologists get so into civilizations being destroyed and eradicated. I think it's more about what they've left behind is something that we should be thinking about. Pottery like this, they're saying that this type of pottery lasted in shape and form from the Minoan civilization into the Mycenaean civilization and kept going. And it says influenced heavily by the Minoan Cretians there. Their pottery was. So it's just a progression. So in other words, maybe in fact the Minoans didn't completely disappear and go under a rock. There was their potters still around, and there's a point here that the potters are still around. What we usually see is the Minoans were so destroyed by the eruption of Santorini that they were just wiped out. They all ended up having disease. They just all hid under rocks, and that was it. The Mycenaeans come in, killed them all, and that's it. Right? That didn't happen because the Mycenaeans need the potters for the pottery. So all the architectural things. So that's nonsense. It wasn't an eradication thing at all. The Minoans are still in the background, and they're just passing their skills on to these new peoples, the Mycenaeans, who are probably a little bit more refined even again. The Mycenaeans typically displayed stylized representations of marine and plant life like the Minoans, and show a fondness for minimalistic linear designs, as you can see. A trend which would influence pottery throughout history and going on and on and on. We've got the word wheel, right? Wheel-made pottery. We've got nothing made on the wheel in this country for another 1,500 years. So we've got a metaphor there for a car and a space rocket, but we don't have the wheel for another 1,500 years. That's interesting there. So early wheel-made Mycenaean pottery. Mainland Greece has been described as a provincial Cretan, which does not convey the fact that although the shapes and decorative styles were of Cretan origin, the final decoration was not quite a finely execution of Minoan influences. Obviously, the Mycenaeans are bringing their own thing into it. However, despite this difference in quality, it's likely the Cretan potters did actually relocate to the mainland. That's exactly what I said. So you know, the Minoans didn't become extinct at all. In terms of raw material, Mycenaean pottery is in fact often superior in quality to Minoan, as a majority was made from old yellow clays and fired at higher temperatures than on Crete. Well, actually, there'd be more wood available and more resources to actually fire them on mainland Greece than it would be on Crete. I think that's an interesting thing. The designs themselves were painted using red to black lustrous iron-based clays, slips. Don't go there again, Chris. Paint, which had a tendency to become mottled depending on the firing process. And here we go. It's saying the parallel there, the Minoan love for shapes and representations of animals, sea and plant life, is continued by the Mycenaeans. So what the Minoans loved was the sea. The Mycenaeans loved the sea as well. It became as popular as it was before. So if it's not broken, just continue going. You know, it's a bit like blue and white pottery, right? We still use it today. And the Han Dynasty was making it 2,000 years ago. So, you know, if it's not broken, the design, keep that thing going. Gradually, through representations, become more stylistic and more symmetrical, with not all of the decorative space filled, leaving significant blanks, something rarely seen in Minoan pottery. So, in other words, we don't need to decorate it all. It's utilitarian. Let's just get it on the shelves and sell it. Depictions of plants such as lilies, palms, and ivy become more monumental, evolving as commonly employed motifs that were reserved principally for large jars. So you can imagine that this is flowing through into classical Greece and into the Roman period. You know, 1,500 years on. Now this is like this to me looks very much Central America, but it's not. It's just like that sort of style of making something with a handle, a container and a spout. It works. Circular, nice bit of black and white design on it. Job done. This is again Mycenaean expansion overseas, taking in ideas. So the ideas are coming into the Mycenaean world. Indeed, pottery is the most important indicator we have of the political domination of the Mycenaeans, as I said at the beginning. Decorations may be divided into two broad groups: pictorial and pattern style. Oh, Christ, what happened there? Hang on a minute. Gillian, stop pressing my buttons. The former was influenced by contemporary fresco designs, so they're getting the representations from frescoes designs, or the other way around, the sort to represent scenes of daily life. So we can learn so much. The pottery tells us about Minoan civilization, and the pottery tells us about Mycenaean civilization. Nearly slipped then. And we see the same with Greek and Roman pottery later on. We can learn so much from the Roman world from what they're representing on their pottery and their carvings. Designs steadily become even bolder and more stylized, often with only a single motif design on each of the vessels, and leaving everything blank. So just one design, sod the rest, that's it. So that was very garish and very, very daring, that somebody's going to buy something without anything on it, and they do. And then you've got they've got this celebration of minimalism, being as minimal in their portrayal as what they're trying to portray as possible. Plain, bold, horizontal lines and whorls continue to be very popular and decorative, well chosen to complement the shape of the vessel. So the vessel determines what you put on it as well, as you can see. Putting a nice bit of black on the handle, nice lines and so on. Popular vessels, vessels evolving, for example, with stem cups. The stems become longer and the bowls shallower over time. New types of vessels were produced, such as one-handled teacups, tankards and jugs with vertical strap handles and either spouts. You've got spouts handles on mats and necks. The most popular Mycenaean vessels are stirrup jar, which is there, so called because the handle resembles a double stirrup. It's perfect, isn't it? Perfect design. You can carry it around with you. It's the first travel cup. The centre of the handle was often often decorated to look like a spout, whereas the true spout was in fact to the side and separate from the handle. Trying to confuse you there. So that was meant to be. That looks like, but it's not. It's there. So you got all these. They're playing with you. And this was a design that came from Crete, and you might store oils or wines in them. Quite simple, just as we do today. And we've got, it's basically showing, second most popular design was an alabastron, a squat jar of various sizes, so named because the early examples were made from alabaster. Yeah, alabastron, alabaster. Yeah. The form first appeared in the 1400s, so it's typical Mycenaean, not Minoan, on the mainland, and basically small ribbon handles near the neck. Alabaster vessels were probably used to store ungons. What's that? Unguents. What are unguents?
You rub them on your body.
Yeah.
Unguents. Okay, fair enough. Did you know that? Unguents. I've learned something today. Some clay vessels were tin plated. I'll read that again. It's interesting. Here we go. Some clay vessels were tin plated. Now, perhaps to imitate more costly silver items. Now, when I read that tin plated, I actually thought, do they mean like Delft, where sort of to give a bit of a colour or whatever? But no, it says tin plate. Is it a glaze? It does.
No,
it's not. It's actually
a glaze.
Yeah.
You can get a glaze made of tin.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's.
But this looks like it was a covering, doesn't it?
Yeah, they would
Reading
say
that.
glaze.
Yeah, they would say glaze, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
It's outside, not inside.
It would have been outside because that's what you're displaying rather than inside.
This one was to have a hot drink.
Do you know we had the trip to Killeen? For finishing 10 minutes. Do you know we had that trip to Killeen? Did some of you buy one of those little clay lamps?
Yeah.
Well, we bought one. We put oil in it, right? Yeah, and we had the thing burning, and then there was no holes in it, but the oil had made its way through the clay. They weren't lined.
Yeah.
So, putting all this in there. In addition, many designs, in particular whorls, were most copied. So you've got lots of nice whorls on there. Probably copied from metal vessels. So they're trying to pottery cover to make them imitate metal vessels. Both of these facts illustrate the pottery was used by ordinary people who were unable to afford the more costly metal versions for their everyday needs. So you've got a bit of a cover of tin on it to make it look like metal. And it's, evolution quickly. Over time, Mycenaean pottery decorations continue to become more and more abstract to the point where it is sometimes difficult to identify the original subject. Well, you can work out what that is. The evolution of the octopus in pottery design is an excellent indicator of the change in style. An early octopus is more or less accurately represented, and its twisting tentacles with detailed suckers randomly cover all of the vase, but gradually they become more formal with tentacles painted systematically on either side of the body, and finally the tentacles become mere lines, impossibly long in relation to the body size, and usually fewer than 8 are depicted. So in other words, they can't be asked later on. This is seriation gone the wrong way round. This is like really advanced at the beginning. By the end, it's just like, let's just get them on the shelf.
Modernism.
Yeah, exactly. Minimalism, modernism. So do you see that there? Actually, unfortunately, I got to announce we're not going to be able to do the final bit about seriation and stuff. But I would say what you can see is that that seriation works where that should be first and that should be next. But when it comes to this pottery in design, that's got really simplified. But actually, the vessel itself has got more complicated. So it does. The vessel has got more complicated, but the design has got simple. That shouldn't really happen in archaeology, but it has here. Okay, what should happen is that design should be on that vessel, and that should be on there. Okay.
They're very unstable to get that small base on them, aren't they?
A pedestal base, little pedestal base, yeah. They always. Well, yeah, they are. They're really unstable. Lots of these were kept on their side, though. The Minoan huge sort of thing of Pithos jars, massive, huge things that size. You can fit 3 or 4 people, and were usually sometimes kept on their side for storage of grain. And if they were for liquid, they were just chucked in the ground. They were never to be removed. This is more like you would carry around, maybe not use it at all. This here we go. This is coming more. Dark bands of varying width become the principal form of decoration, and only the space near the neck of the vessel is used for pictorial representation, particularly. So in other words, the pictorial design is moving up the vessel this way. Okay, and it gets a lot more plainer. Particularly popular were chariot scenes, which is seen in Minoan. But later on, it obviously evolves with double axes, tusked helmets, were popular subjects, as were animals, birds, and griffins, often arranged heraldically and themselves decorate pattern designs, possibly imitating contemporary textile designs. So we see pottery being influenced by what's going on the walls and on textiles. An excellent example of this technique can be seen in the bull and bird decoration vase from the British Museum, where the bodies are divided into sections, each decorated with dots, wavy lines, scales, crosses. This vessel shape, the deep bowl, became very popular by about the 1200s, and there are rare examples of white decorations on a dark background. So it'd be a dark pot with white decoration. And obviously, I can't read through all that now, just run out of time. But obviously the designs are evolving and so on. And we've got their sarcophagi and figurines, and they're really decorative people architecturally. And look at that there. These are much later. Those up there. And it's sort of these are known as the Mycenaean writer drinking cups for ceremonial purposes. You might just pick them up and just chuck them or whatever, break them. But you've got 3 intact examples there. You're not going to be able to stand that on the table. You're going to have to stand it in sand or something. Yeah, and even then it's going to be unstable. And these may be buried with the dead and so on. They might not actually be properly used. And the Mycenaean legacy. We'll do this bit and then we'll just mention one other thing we'll call it a day. The Mycenaean legacy. Mycenaean pottery was exported and imitated not only throughout the Aegean, but also in places Turkey, modern-day Syria, Egypt, and even Spain. Got to Spain. So if it got to Spain, it may have actually even got to us with the trade in tin and all that stuff. There is also evidence that Mycenaean potters actually relocated and set up workshops abroad in Turkey and even Italy. Get around a bit, don't they? Indeed, it may well be that the designs of Mycenaean origin introduced into these areas lived on and continued all the way through up to the point of Rome, when Rome sort of starts to get into Greece by about 200 years BC. And then finally, by the end, we get disruption, we get decline. Pottery and pottery trade is reliant upon security and safety. And when you've got disruption, potteries are burnt down. And therefore, you're unable to keep your flow of culture going. And what may have simply happened was that pottery failed to be distributed after about 1200 years BC because things are not safe. The Mycenaean world may have continued, but their markers as a people failed to be transferred. And when we talked about Greece last week with Alexander the Great, the Greek cities remained Greek for hundreds of years after Alexander the Great had gone. We might be seeing with the Mycenaean civilization the reverse. They're unable to trade their pottery, the hallmarks of who they are and their identity, and therefore we see a decline in who they are. And trade creates money, and therefore they get poorer. And that was a decline of the Mycenaean world, not a great romping and pillaging through the Mycenaean world. I wanted to mention quickly Flinders Petrie with his work in Egypt, finding Mycenaean pottery. They communicated back and forth, Schliemann and Flinders Petrie, and they worked out that actually Mycenaean pottery was loved and cherished by the Egyptian pharaohs. And you know, the relative dating technique with seriation, obviously the pottery got more complicated, which Flinders Petrie was saying, the more complicated pottery gets, the more closer in time you are. But as we have seen, the designs on them don't tie in with that. So you just ignore the design, right? And actually you just go with the actual shape and form. That's really important, very important. And just quickly, I'll mention Flinders Petrie seriation. Those vessels at the top there are basic, and as you go through time, these advanced potteries are closer to us in time. That's the seriation method. And here we go. 3 minutes. Pylos excavations. I've got there. And this is dated the 13th of January 2013. Pylos. Mycenae, lower central mainland Greece. On the left there, Pylos. Okay. And looking over towards Italy. So what they've got this site that they've excavated. They're releasing the information. This is new as anything. The results of the excavations carried out by the Archaeological Society led to revise our knowledge about Mycenaean sites with truly unexpected findings. He noted that the excavations have revealed one of the capitals of the Mycenaean kingdom of Pylos. But the finds have radically changed what archaeologists believed until that time. Cyclopedian architecture, large architecture, okay, developed architecture. Then you've got developed urban structures, paved roads, plazas, aqueducts, water systems, central sewage, linear B lighting, murals. On the basis of what we knew until now about Mycenaean Greece, such finds were confined to big palaces. Now on smaller sites, they're forced to rethink. The finds also showed that Iclania, they excavated, was at some point violently taken over by the nearby kingdom of Pylos, while others indicated that it may have been part of an earlier federal state. So Pylos, Mycenaean state taken over another state, blah, blah, blah. But the interesting thing about the archaeology is based on the Linear B archives found at Ano Aglanos, another site, which is considered the central capital of the Mycenaean kingdom of Pylos, even though Eclania was a secondary capital of the kingdom and under the authority of central capital and all the rest of all this political stuff. For example, it had its own governor and its own economic production, so it's self-sufficient. So what they're saying is that there was a lot of self-sufficiency within the Mycenaean world. You know, there were all these sub-governors, they were all able to help themselves. Based on existing evidence, this system of governance was the most ancient version of two tiers of government. They had two tiers of government: central authority, Mycenae, and they had all these little states around the outside, as we said at the beginning, which were able to control what was going on. And they would come together when there was a national emergency, and there would be Mycenaeans. He noted that the Mycenaean kingdom of ancient Greece were the first certified states of the Western world, and marked the transition from a world without states to a world where the state prevailing political institution, where you had tiers of authority, like we get the Westminster Parliament and we get the Welsh Assembly. And look at this, Pylos, another article here, texts from 1,500 years BC, written texts. Around there anyway, so we've got written texts. We don't get written text for another 1,500 years at least. So they're finding this written information to really tell us what Pylos is about. And on that note, we're going to call it a day. So are there any questions? I have shocked you all. And again, what I'd like next week is a firm answer about us. You need to talk about cars and transport. And next week, oh God, I've got a land-based excavation. I've got a beaker. I've got land-based excavation in about 6 weeks' time. We've got a beaker before beaker lecture. So you know, I'm not running out of topics at all. Next week is the life and times of Keith. Assyrian tablets. So that image there will tie us then directly into the Assyrian tablets because it's text and the archaeology of that. And naturally, next week I might fudge around with another issue. Evidence for early writing in Britain as well. But that will just be a subnote. So if there are any questions today?
No.
Have you all enjoyed this today?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And I tell you what, you got your shekels worth there.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it takes a lot.
And to be honest with you, the problem is with that is that there's no way with such a big area can you just cover individual sites. So I couldn't just done Mycenae, I just needed to do lots of other things.
Interesting, they could extract DNA from Minoan bones and Mycenaean bones and then compare if they were just a continuation of the...
Which they probably
same
were.
people. Yeah.
Which would have answered Gillian's question quite nicely. You go.
Thank you.
That's just to annoy you. Dennis, I want you to tell me exactly what that feels like when you finish watching it.
Oh, I was trying to give it away. It's not my kind of thing, but I might watch it.
He might be interested because he used to live in Japan and he's not going to watch it. I can't. Are you coming tomorrow night, Dennis?
Yeah.
Good.
Well,
Yeah.
it's just the,
7:15. It's just around here.
it's the usual route, is it? Because I've
Well, no,
I've done it about 3 times.
Oh, come on, Dennis. I'm going to throw him. I'm trying to convince Dennis to come tomorrow. You've got to come to
No, I didn't say
tomorrow.
I said it was coming, but I just asked whether it would be different from the other times.
Oh, don't worry, Dennis. We'll sort you out.
I'll be snowing by tomorrow night.
Yeah.
Shut up, you twat. Is it?
Maybe.
Oh, don't tell me it's
East
forecast.
and
Weather,
east.
yeah, cold weather.
Pest from the west.
Yep.
See you later.
I thought we'd already had that. We got a test from
Enjoyed
Langford.
it so much the last time he's coming back again.
Gillian.
What?
Oh, they're yours. Goff, have you enjoyed it today?
Oh, yeah, wonderful.
Good to be back.
What's
the
first recognised
you know, yeah, you know I phoned Langford, obviously. That's in about 2 months' time. I phoned him
Does
back.
it go
Yeah.
back,
That's
say,
it.
to 1700s?
He's good on.
They did a lot of science in the 1700s.
Oh,
When was the
You never
first
hear about
archaeologist
it.
recognised?
Anything before the 19th century.
1800s, I think, maybe.
I think it was just plenty of that stuff before.
Well, I suppose.
I'll see you soon. See you next week.
When they
Goff.
started to actually
Don't let the bad work fight.
record it and recognise it for what it was.
So sort of Napoleon when he went out and took Egypt in the 1800 or whatever, 1792, what they call them, all the experts with him, to look at the pyramids and everything like that, and
So
finding
that
the
was-
Rosetta Stone.
Right.
So that's 1790 odd, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're obviously aware of archaeology and that.
Yeah. Oh well.
Oh well, I tell you what, that was. Hello, Ruth. I'm a bit knackered. Right.
Okay. That's it, isn't it?
Do you know what? Do you know what? Right, I can really stir it now. Do you know Bridgend don't get any of these free gifts? They don't get any of this stuff.
Because
They
they're
just get abuse.
a load of what's it, something.
And I'm allowed to slag off people in Bridgend and Peter. He's got the license.
Very good.
Well, I've got a special box for these. Look at that now.
I've got lots of boxes now. Don't complain you haven't got enough boxes.
Do you know what I'm going to do? We're going to send them a.
Boxes will probably be a raffle prize next week, won't they?
If you don't mind, right, you're winding me up. I went out my way to get him a DVD that he might like, and do you know what? He's going to give it away.
He loves it. I can tell.
I think you confused Japan
He
and
might have it
China.
already.
Japan and China are the same country, surely.
Did you live in Japan then, Dennis?
Yeah, quite a long time.
Oh, right.
The problem is when Dennis lived there, right? They used to know him as the Ho Chi Minh of Yakanaka City.
Yeah, well that's it. Vietnam, that's the same as China and Japan.
George C. Clark,
Bless them.
Amazing Spaces.
Cheerio, everybody. See you next week.
Bye, Keith.
Bye.
Cheerio.
Looking at their buildings and architecture.
Keith.
Well, this is it. There's a TV I couldn't hear at the beginning.
Oh yes, George C. Clark. He does buildings and stuff like that. But he's in Japan.
Oh, right.
It looks beautiful.
Oh, it's a beautiful country. I'm probably going to go there later this year. One of my sons is still over there. He keeps asking me. I went last year.
Look, you nearly had me, Dan.
Well, I was working at
Where's this bloody bin?
But I left 7 years
Thank you.
ago.
Oh, go on, do it
When I
again.
went back,
Well done. Well done.
it's, you shouldn't think it might.
Oh, so you liked your little key ring, did you? You liked your little key ring? Oh, Kathy was going to get that, so I still don't know if you had the up to you.
Until they got to the top level and you got the most amazing view. Just beautiful scenery.
Everyone is wonderful.
The thought behind it.
Do that.
Yeah.
And then you have this little tiny house.
Little tiny lane.
In the city. That was amazing, incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's my daughter, my 21-year-old
Oh,
son.
yeah.
You know, when I first went there,
She didn't follow you.
and teaching in the university, and they arranged
Ooh!
accommodation for me.
You asked for that, then.
My family
You
was
bloody
there.
did.
So they
That's
provided
my
pots and they thought was enough
grandson.
for 4 people kind of thing. And I looked
Oh,
at
then he
it,
looked good.
this will do it.
Well, there's glasses shooting.
But then one
Wow,
of the
he's slim, isn't he?
secretaries
He's
of
like
the
his
university She was living
Oh, you never said
next door,
right.
and her father appeared to her in the newspaper. You know,
Right.
he was quite rich.
Don't spoil it. He looks like a handsome young lad.
It was
He is, but he is very
children
much
were there,
looking
they
like
brought,
that.
you know, friends around, Japanese
But
kids.
he's got his mum's hands and
You
feet.
know, it didn't seem big to me at all.
What the hell?
So obviously you big budget.
I'll see you next week, Kathy. Do you feel like
Well,
we're
I never
okay?
learned the language. It seemed that people find that hard to believe. But
How come I
it's,
got to keep it
I was supposed to be teaching English at the time. You know. So,
I'm the vice
and when
keeper when you
I
don't
holiday, my family didn't stay there because it didn't suit the boys' education. You know, they had to go to an American
Mr. Sheen,
school,
Jock,
which they said was more of a culture shock. Well, it's very Christian school, and they said it was more of a culture shock than going to Japan. You know, and but I mean, they had a good time, but it wouldn't have suited their education. And they looked off British qualifications. You know, so you know, my wife and me two of them went back, and I used to go home every holiday, which is 3 times a year. So I spent all my free time in England. So I learned the language. Well, it's an interesting thing I've ever done.
You see the pictures of them, but actually the countryside is beautiful.
The mountains
And
were
the
wonderful.
gardens.
We used to go in the mountains every weekend.
Again, they're such a diverse people because they can be really brutal and yet they create beautiful things.
Oh yeah.
Cheerio, you
They're not really more brutal than anyone else.
Well, no,
It's
not
just World War II,
yes,
you know.
yeah.
And it's but at the same time, you know, the workplace, all those societies are different.
Well,
you know.
Yeah, as
And,
you say, certainly going on at the moment that can be as brutal as anybody else.
yeah.
So, no, it was lovely. Lovely. It was interesting.
Well, as I said, I probably will get that later on this year. I keep thinking I've got to do things, you know, and really I don't get to it.
So is your son going to think about coming back here?
Well, he's talking about it. He's doing the same kind of thing. I've been teaching English, and he's 44, I think, you know, and he's not married. And he was saying things that other teachers used to say to me when I was there. That when it comes to the end of the school year, a lot of your foreign friends leave, you know, and you're always finding that you're the same about people, you know. It would be better to be more settled somewhere, you know.
Oh, that's very interesting,
Yeah.
Dennis. Very
Yeah,
interesting.
I think it doesn't take much to start rambling on, you know.
Well, no, it's good, you know, we see it all the time. You can talk to somebody who lives there.
Some people who live there would say negative things because they felt they weren't accepted. But I didn't care whether I was accepted or not.
Well, you didn't necessarily want to be one of them. You were who you are.
Yeah,
But
that's
you know what? Don't make it a new Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy with all the original thing, radio thingy, right? And you can be my Zaphod Beeble box.
Well,
I
you
didn't get
tell
the
me what
reference.
that is, then I'll copy it.
Do you know what? This woman keeps in touch with me throughout the week and she's stalking me.
Yes. Yeah, I am. Right, well, I shall see you next week for another exciting adventure. It was very good.
It was
Yeah,
good
it
today.
was really good.
I really sort of think.
And Kathy said she didn't have enough information, but she said she was being sarcastic.
I'm sure she was.
It's great.
No, it was great, Carl.
Well, I'm glad.
I'm glad for the eggs. Right.
Who's saying they're still in your bag?
Yeah, they are.
Oh, look at that.
You know, in the back. Say thank you to the chickens.
I certainly shall. Oh, I will say thank you to Mavanley, Socks, and the other two. They are. I will see you soon, darling.
You might see me tomorrow if it's not pouring.
Please do £6.
Yeah.
My love, my people, my audience. Yeah.
Get us arrested and
Yeah, we will.
anything else.
Oh, by the way, Mike, don't tell her about the goodness of being buried in the church graveyard. Volunteer. That's for tomorrow night.
Bye.
See you soon.
Bye then.
Take care. care. See you maybe tomorrow or next week. Take care. Take care, Dennis. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye. Don't walk into a car. Bye. See you. Safe for... Oh, shit. Hello. Hello. Oh, we finished late. How are you?